to the world.
And you were right about this Armageddon thing. When I used to be a fundamentalist preacher years ago, and that's exactly how I thought. This world, this natural world we live in, is not important. It's another world we're aiming for, so who cares what we do to our environment, or who cares what happens to the war, who cares about human suffering now because there will be glory. And you're right. The way I used to think, and many of these right-wingers think, they revel in this idea of a bloodbath and the end of the world, and that's scary.
Yes, it is extremely scary.
Now, you've kind of coined another phrase. You refer to faith heads.
Oh, yes.
Which I like.
Yes, okay. I guess that comes from what sort of acid heads and things like that. It is very much like a drugged state. Sometimes you see pictures of these fanatical Muslims especially, but Christians too, with kind of wild staring eyes, totally taken over by the virus of faith and prepared to do anything, to kill, to die. It is a very, very dangerous state of mental illness.
So you think it is like a virus? Like, alcoholism isn't really a virus, but it's a mind disorder. So religion can have that same kind of, like somebody who's bulimic. They can't control themselves, and religion can do that to your brain, where you just walk around in a daze.
Yes, and unlike alcohol, it's more infectious. I mean, you do get infected with religion, usually as a young child, and then if you're unlucky, it stays with you for the rest of your life. But you can also be infected by a very charismatic preacher. I mean, a kind of Billy Graham type, who you go to a rally and get infected there.
Well, maybe we can infect people with reason. Maybe that's what your new book can do.
Of course, that's the aim. That's what we're all trying to do. It's superficially not necessarily such an attractive thing to infect people with, but I think it can be made attractive, and that's one of the things, not just in this book, but in all my books, I've tried to do.
I remember your 1986 book, The Blind Watchmaker. Just as I had come out of religion, one of your sentences in there really hit me between the eyes, right in the middle of the book. You said, "Of course, any God capable of intelligently designing something as complex as the DNA protein replicating machine must have been at least as complex and organized as that machine itself."
Yes.
And that's just a sentence in the middle of a paragraph that it infected my thinking back then, and I'm sure your writings and your works and your preaching for reason have done some of that. We're helping to undo the virus of religion.
I'm terribly encouraged that you should say that about that one sentence, because in effect that is that one sentence is expanded into a whole chapter in the God Delusion.
Yes,
chapter 4.
The Boeing 747.
It is the key chapter, and I think it's a totally unanswerable point. I don't claim it for myself, but I think it's a totally unanswerable point. I've never met anybody who gave an adequate answer to it. And it's particularly good because it, as it were, takes the weapon of actually the creationists and turns it on themselves, because their greatest weapon is the argument from improbability. They love doing statistical calculations of the improbability of something like an eye or a hemoglobin molecule or a bacterial flagellum. And of course those things are statistically improbable. That's the very thing that any decent theory of life has got to do, is to explain how something as improbable as that comes into being. And so the one theory that can't possibly explain it is a God, because the God would have to be as improbable. The only kind of theory that can explain it is something like Darwinian natural selection, which is what Dan Dennett calls a crane. It starts from small beginnings and it builds up by slow, gradual degrees. That's the only way you're ever going to explain improbable complexity in the world.
Well, we'll be right back. We have to take a little break, and we hope you can stay on the line, Professor Dawkins. And we'll talk about the virus of religion and one of your pet peeves about the manipulation of children and religion.